Awesome. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining. Welcome to TUG for Q4. This is our last Tableau user group of this year for the Wisconsin TUG, and we'll be showing some election data Viz This. So special thanks to all of our community members who wanted to participate in this election data Viz This. We're really excited to see what people have put together. And later in this meeting, each of the presenters will share their screens and walk through the visualization that they put together with the data set that they were provided. So I'm very excited. We'll get to see some cool stuff. Let's see if I can get to the next slide. There we go. So as always, our leadership team, we've got Brandy, Jen, Tammy, Robert, myself, and Brady. Feel free anytime to reach out to us if you have any interest in being a part of any of our TUG meetings. We love bringing in our community members and making it interactive for everybody. Our agenda today, so start with a poll for everyone to join in and put in their responses. Then we'll move on to our Viz This presentations. Afterwards, Jen is going to show us some election data at the national level. So we'll start with the Wisconsin level and then move to the national level. Followed by myself, I'll be sharing some tips on how to continue to be involved in the community. I think that's a great segue looking ahead into 2025. So if you're hoping to set goals for yourself or just get more involved, hopefully those will be helpful information for you. And then we'll end with some of our upcoming events and giveaways. And then today we will have a prize giveaway at the end, so make sure to stay until the end in case you could win one of our prize giveaways. So our Viz This creators will be winners along with one of our active attendees today. All right, and then I'm going to hand it over to Brady to lead the poll.
I will also send the poll in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Give everyone a second to join. Hope everyone's having a good day. Do you have the results on the next page? You want me to share my screen, Tosh?
I will have you share your screen if that's all right.
Yep, can do.
All right.
One second. Go ahead and set the poll. First question seems on brand for our data today is: do you plan to vote in November's election? Be an overwhelming yes. That's good. That's what we're covering today. Nice. Next question is: so we're going to cover we covered the general election, the last one, but did you vote primary presidential election this year? So overwhelming majority. Nice. But everyone's planning to vote the next one in the presidential election next month. I'll get some of that data in our presentation today. And the rest are non-election based questions. Where are you joining us from today? This is Wisconsin Tug. We'll take anyone that wants to join. I'm out of the Milwaukee area, so I'm joining you from southeast Wisconsin today. We did have a debate on what are the regions of Wisconsin, but so we went with this for our results today. Gosh, mostly southeast. This was also a very debated topic among the tug leaders, is your favorite pie. You can only select one. It's that time of the year. I know Costco has a great pumpkin pie, but it's the size of the Cafita family. It's hard to buy for an ordinary occasion. We have a couple more questions. Just fill out the group. Favorites fall sport, or maybe it's other because you don't like sports, any of them in general. And our last question is, it also pertains to what we're going to end today, is where do you look for Tableau or other visual inspiration? This one you can select as many as you that are pertaining to what you look for. And if you don't have a good spot, a lot of these are great places to look. I probably find some from all of these, but hopefully we'll cover some of that today in our ideas of where to look for data and how to get involved in the community. But that was the last question. Thanks for participating.
Thanks, Brady. All right. I'm going to bring my screen back up. And I see Tammy has joined us. Tammy, let me know if you're ready to go.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
okay, awesome. Awesome. So I had an idea for this Viz This segment in the interest of this being an election year. So to have a little competition. So participation was voluntary and 5 TUG members accepted the challenge. All of the creators were given the same data sets. So voter turnout statistics for the state of Wisconsin from 2 recent general elections, the last presidential election in 2020 and then the 2022 midterms. The assignment was simple. It was just to take these data sets to create a viz and tell a story about Wisconsin voter turnout. So the only rules were that the viz had to use these data sets as the primary data in the viz, but creators could supplement the data with other related data found in the public domain. So the creators will show and tell their vizzes today, and everyone in attendance will have a chance to vote for their favorite. Because why wouldn't we have a vote involved? So there are prizes for the creators, so please choose your favorite and vote at the end. And first up, we have, can you go to the next slide, Tosh?
Yes.
So first up is Naveen. So Naveen is the founder of Data Product Consulting, is a Tableau ambassador and a podcast host. He loves pizza, kung fu, and the Milwaukee Bucks. So the floor is yours.
Hey, thank you so much. How do I share my? Okay, Perfect. First of all, to all the TUG members and members of the board, thank you so much for this opportunity. Really grateful for this, and thank you to all those who have joined in today as well.
Yeah, thank you, Naveen. We're excited to see what you put together.
Yep, absolutely. I'm going to be sharing my screen, so if you could just give a quick thumbs up whether you can see it.
Yep, looks good.
All right, perfect. Good morning again, everyone. My name is Naveen, and today I'll be presenting the data and the findings from our election data. So before I start, just a quick take on why and how we kind of decided to go with this design. I've created what is called as the Wisconsin News Board, and it's a fresh take on the age-old newspaper. And we have created that as news and a dashboard. So that's the news board, and it's going to be helping Wisconsin voters to gain deeper insights of their voice in the democracy. So with that, let me start with the first headline that came from the data, which is about 700,000 voters were turned away from elections, which was a bad sign that says that voter turnout drops in Wisconsin. Now, this story has been developing for a while, so I just wanted to gain your attention to tell you what the story was. For those who are a little new to the demographics of Wisconsin, let's start with the voter participation that you see on your left-hand side of your screen. The total population of Wisconsin is roughly around 5.8 million, and about 4.4 of those are eligible voters. This data comes in from census.gov, which was conducted in 2020. And in that, if you see, there are, if you take a look at the total ballots that were cast, it's 3.3 million, and then again a 2.6. So that we do see a general trend that is down, and you can see that the participation actually was coming a little towards the down end of the spectrum. Now, a quick question that everybody might ask is like, why is this dip coming in? So this is a national phenomenon, and Wisconsin is not an exception to it, where there is a presidential election, you will see a higher turnout because there's a lot of eyeballs that come through. But regional elections tend to be a little lower in participation. So that reflects in our data. Also, those who might be new to Wisconsin and just understanding the ecosystem a little bit, let's take a look at how the spread of Wisconsin's population comes out to be. We're talking here about this graph. As you can see, most of the population and their voter density is around these 4 counties. Now, which are those 4? We call it the big Wisconsin Big Four. That's the Milwaukee County, which has about 460,000 voters in it. Then the next one is Waukesha, Dane County, and the Brown County. Now, these account for more than 37% of the total voter base. Now, that's a lot. That's about 1.2 million of that big 3.3 million that we were talking about. And we'll come to that just in a bit. You'll see more of this story unfold, why we decided to focus on these 4 that play a major role in deciding how Wisconsin actually votes. But for those who are new, I wanted to point out that although it looks like a big state, most of its population is centered around these particular counties. Moving on, let's look at what's Wisconsin's heartbeat like. Now, the heartbeat of Wisconsin is essentially calculating how much of the percentage of people who signed up to vote actually went out and voted. So ideally, you would like to see a straight line or something which is pulsating up. Now, that was not the case. We're going to be looking at both the 2020 presidential election on your left and the midterm elections that occurred in 2022. And there were a few big headlines that came from those as well. Let's start with the first one, which is from the 2020 presidential elections. Florence, amongst others, skip a heartbeat. Florence County. Now, can anybody from the audience quickly tell me without looking, because there's no location here, but which is Florence County? Can anybody in the audience tell me in this graph? All right, I didn't hear anyone. So we're going to show that here right away. This is the Florence County, which actually had surprisingly a really low turnout, and about 20% of people did not show up who registered. So that was a big headline that came through. And it was not the only one, but we found three others, which comprised of Florence, Richland, and Burnett, that almost lost about 20, 10, and 7 respectively. So you can see those numbers kind of showing where in the presidential elections the voter turnout kind of went a little bit down. The other main thing to notice a trend that came out from the data, which is another headline, was the urban conundrum. Now, we would think that in urban areas, with the level of participation, media, all the attention that is there, along with the major companies and major political events happening, that you would see a higher turnout. But the data suggested exactly the contrary. That's why we had the urban conundrum. Whether it's the Milwaukee County or the Dane County, you saw a lot of decline. And if you see at the data that shows, there is a decline of more than like 23% in just Milwaukee itself, where we are sitting in here right now and where I'm calling in from. So urban counties like Milwaukee and Dane, they saw like a sharper decline that came in from their data. Another few things that noticed from the Wisconsin heartbeat, as you can see, we would ideally like to see a straight line or something which is up. That means more voters actually showed up than they were registered on the day. But then you can see in midterms, there were a few big dips that you can see. And one particular one that we'd like to point out is that which was Kenosha County. Obviously, with some of the unfortunate happenings that happened in that particular county, it was noted that there was a big decrease and a big alienation of a lot of voters within that county that happened. So that was a significant gap that was noticed in Kenosha. For those who do not know where Kenosha is, it's in the rightmost corner of the Wisconsin tip. And that's about 55% of the decrease that came out. With that, all of these headlines that came in our particular news board came in from an analysis that came in from the individual counties, the municipalities, and the wards. So finally, in the news board, we would like you to also, we'd like you to leave you with a tool where you can find out what's exactly happening in your particular county, in your particular municipality, and in your particular ward. This tool is for you, that you can find out exactly what the participation levels were. And the hope is that from here, you also go and encourage your neighbors, people in your ward to go and vote, and also voice their opinions in a great democracy. Thank you so much for listening to the news board. That's the end of the news bulletin. Thank you so much. We'd love to take any questions if you have any.
Looks very good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Naveen.
Right. Yep. Thank you, Naveen. That was awesome. I loved that. Tosh, can you bring up the slideshow? Who's next?
Yep.
Prasan, you're next. So Prasan is a senior BI engineer. I'm going to butcher this, so I'm sorry. Emirates NBD, the founder of Tableau Buddy and Viz Diner, and a leader of the analytics and Tableau Buddy tugs. So take it away, Prasan.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, team, for putting this Viz This competition, as well as it was exciting to look at the data set and then have my Viz skills polish a bit and go through the data as well. It was kind of interesting. So let me share my screen now. Okay, so the visualization, it talks about the shift of voters in Wisconsin state. Please pardon me for all the pronunciation. There might be problems as well. So just a disclaimer before that. So the shift of voters in Wisconsin is all about measuring the decrease of voters, what we have seen from the presidential election in 2020 to midterm election in 2022. Now, here we have done a bit of mathematics to not just look at the numbers, because numbers can be directly misleading, because Daveen really brought a good perspective of having the population data as well. So that really adds value. I didn't did that. So what I did is actually I'm looking at the change in percentage ratio. So with all the different metrics, that is our total voters, open registrants, late registrants, and election day registrants, we're taking the ratio with the total number of registered voters. And then we are finally looking at the change in percentage ratio in terms of percentage points. And then we have also classified this whole thing into 3 buckets as per the using percentile. So our salmon color is all below the 25th percentile. And then we have this purple violet color for 25th to 75th percentile. And all the green that you'll be looking over is above 75th percentile. So that's the basis of this whole visualization, to keep it minimalistic as well as use as few colors as possible. So now we will look at the whole scenario of how it is looking right now in comparison to the presidential election in 2022. So first we are looking at the change in total voters to registered voters ratio. Now, if we look at this whole map, we're kind of looking at so many green, purple, as well as salmon. But right now we have also highlighted the names for all of the counties that are in our 75th percentile. So it looks like we are doing pretty good in all these counties. It has increased. But now, if we look at this right side, it gives us the real picture. The real picture is there has been a decrease, and because it's percentile, actually the range is going from minus 36 to minus 9%. There is no decrease. There is no increase, actually. It's all decrease. And if we look at this Menominee County, it has registered somewhere around minus 33%, and that's a lot. So using this, we can actually take a look at a whole perspective of which of the states are doing better and where they're lying, actually, because it's kind of remarkable to see that so many of them are in the minus 21 to minus 18 percentage point range. And we can also look at each of them, who are they. And also here we can look at the details. Let's say if it is Lincoln County, how much the percentage was in 2020, and what is the ratio in 2022 as well. So looking at that, we are getting that picture. But now the question is, can we really find out what is the real problem here? Because we are seeing a decrease in terms of this total voters to registered voters ratio. So further, now we'll look at some of the other metrics that we have. So first, we are looking at change in open registrants to registered voters ratio and how the change looks like. Now here, it's kind of very like it has only few colors. We can see some of the greens, and there's salmon as well. There's no purple, so nobody's lying in the 25th and thus in almost near the median, right? But now if we look at here, it shows us a better perspective. It's actually not negative. It's better. It's positive, and some of the counties have improved as well, right? Like if we say the Menominee County, it was minus 33% actually, but now it is 3%. So that's good. So it's not the only reason that is pulling that particular county down. So what's more, because this is actually telling us that, okay, there are positive increase, but altogether we are getting a decrease in the total voters ratio. So further, if we go down, now we are looking at the change in late registrants to registered voters. Now here also, it's kind of very skewed. Only few of them are in the 75th percentile or above the median, rest of them. But also again, now if we see again right here, the decrease isn't that much. It's going up to zero, almost. It's all zero, so no change. But still, like there has been minimalistic decrease here. Again, the one that has the lowest is Menominee County again. So somewhat there is a factor that there has been decrease in the late registrants to the registered voters ratio altogether. Now, all these three different metrics have given us some perspective, but we still couldn't find out that what was the big pull. So now the last metrics that we have is election day registrants, the people who are registering on the election day itself. And now we can see all the colors coming in again. We have a great distribution. Also, we can see that it is almost distributing over minus 16% to 4%. Some of them have increased as well, but most of them are going down. That's something to look out for. And again, our Menominee County again has been decreasing by minus 15% in terms of that. Now, in a whole, I started with a particular story, and we were looking at a particular county, but the whole visualization can be looked in many ways to find out whichever county is doing better in terms of all these different metrics. Also, one of the interesting thing is, now if we go back to the top, and right now we were focusing on only the 75th percentile, because most of the time we would like to see the names. A map without names, even if I am living in that area, might be confusing. So if we want to really check out and see which cities without even hovering over that, we want to look at are in the 25th and 75th percentile range, we can also use this as a tool and further explore this visualization and look at how it is doing and who are the actual counties that are in that particular range. So kind of a perspective to see in a different way, to see the shift, and maybe it can be helpful to even look at where to pinpoint and where to actually focus on to increase that particular ratio and the shift as well. So that's all. Thank you so much. I'll put that visualization link in the chat box.
Yes, that would be great. And Naveen, yours as well, if you've got the link handy.
Looked really good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Prasan. Love that. Nice work.
I'm interested in how the sausage is made, but I'm not any help.
Okay, so next up is Erin, and Erin couldn't be with us today, so I am actually presenting Erin's Viz for her. And I apologize for the background noise behind me. But Erin is a business intelligence analyst with Rising Tide Analytics. She enjoys traveling with her son, watching the Packers and her cats, and reading. So I have Erin's Viz. Let me go to that screen and so I can share that.
Schultz, Donna, check. Schultz, Edwin, check. What did she say was the Seedor, Jean, check.
Okay, it's not letting me share. Why will it not let me share?
Kenneth, check.
Tosh, if I put the link in the chat to her Tableau Public Viz, can you just share it for me?
Yep, I can do that.
Okay. Let me get to it.
All right. Is this right, Tammy?
Okay, thank you. So Erin is pretty passionate about voting issues and devotes her personal time to both get out the vote efforts and also volunteering on election days at her local polling center. So this data really piqued her interest because she knows from volunteering the dramatic downturn in voters during non-presidential elections. So she was curious to see what the data actually showed. So she framed her visual by defining what she wanted to identify. And for that, she looked at the data through a lens of someone working on increased get out the vote efforts at the county level. She wanted to see which counties excelled at this, which counties didn't, and which stayed steady, with the hopes of targeting efforts to counties with both low registration and low voter turnout. Also using the map view, she wanted to show that even if people are registered, it's still critically important to ensure that those who are registered have a voting plan. So Erin's Viz up in the upper left corner is a QR code that links to the myvotewisconsin.gov site where voters can check their registration status. They can request absentee ballots and find their election day polling place. So it's really a really useful piece of information. Erin, if you could click on the information icon. Yep. So clicking on the information icon brings up the supplemental data where she used population data of 18 plus residents collected from the Wisconsin Department of Health based on the 2020 census data. So she just added a little explanation of where she got that from. So if we click off of that, so Erin's Viz, you can toggle between 2020 and 2022. So if you click on 2022, the data changes, basically showing how many were registered in each year. So registered in 2022 and voted in 2022. And then if you click on 2020, it changes. So you can toggle back and forth between the two. And then there's a slider to show how many counties do you want to view. It's ranked by the bottom rank of counties from worst to best, if you will. And then on the above the scatter plot, you can click on the scatter to show the scatter, or if you click on the map, it will actually show, if you click on the map up at the top, right there, yep, it'll show, it'll change the view to a map. So back on the Viz, the box is showing registrations and voters by percent of voting age population. If you're on 2020, that's what it's going to show. It's going to show the county, how many are registered, the percent of residents who are registered, and then the voters and the percent of voters. So that's what it shows when clicking on 2020. And if you change the slider to 72, it's going to show all of Wisconsin's 72 counties. The scatter plot highlights in purple the counties that are included in the ranked chart. So if you click on the scatter and you have all whatever counties, however many counties you're showing, it's going to change them all to purple. So we have it at 72. So very interactive. And if you switch back to the map view, you can see the lowest turnout counties and the highest turnout counties if you have on the map view. You get essentially the same data for 2022 with the addition of a turnout change calculation that shows the drop in turnout between a presidential and a midterm election. So you have just one column added. So very short, direct, and to the point, but I think it gives I think it gives a lot of information if what your goal is to see the difference between 2020 and 2022 for things that Aaron is interested in, like get out the vote efforts. So I went through that really fast, but I think I covered everything. And I really appreciate her participating in absentia with us.
Awesome. Thanks for walking us through that, Tammy.
Yep, you bet. So next we have, if we get the slide deck back up, I believe we have Brandy next. So Brandy, I think we all know Brandy, but for those who don't, she's a data analytics manager for Artisan Partners, the co-founder of Data Career Summit, and the host of Data Book Club. So Brandy has a viz to show us.
I do. And I will say, mine is not nearly as cool as everybody else's. So prepare yourself to be disappointed, I suppose. But I did do something that I think was a little bit different than everybody else, which is that I looked at the data by ward. So I think a lot of people chose to do it by county. We're all very familiar with like Wisconsin counties. Well, maybe the folks who grew up had school here in Wisconsin and had to like memorize all the counties. Anyway, I don't need to share my trauma with everybody. So I wanted to do it by ward to just be a little bit different. So that was my challenge to myself. And then I think also too, like, your polling place depends on your ward, that where you're registered to vote. And so that's, again, kind of the reason I did that. So again, let me share my very simple visualization with you all. Can you see my screen? Yeah, cool.
Yes.
Okay, so this is my visualization. Very simple. 3 maps of Wisconsin by ward, which that was the challenging part, to find the shape file associated with every ward. And we have here the number of voters per ward in 2020, and then the middle chart is the number of voters in the 2022 midterms. We can kind of see, if we hover over a given ward, like how many registered voters there are in that location. And then this third chart shows you the difference from 2020 to 2022, up or down, how many voters, like what's the just very kind of simple difference between those two. Now, these maps don't look markedly different from one another. So if we go in, we can select a county. I'm going to pick on Milwaukee County because that's where I live. And we can see then a little bit more distinction here. We have our results from 2020. We can see, I think I'm 168, Ward 168 here. Over here, slightly different, slightly maybe lower number of registered voters. And then we have a more colorful difference chart. I think what stood out to me is that the difference is actually pretty well balanced. Whether you look at the state or you go down to the county level. I think on average, it certainly looks like there's fewer voters, which I think the other visitors today have also shared that insight. But from ward to ward, yeah, I mean it's a fairly colorful chart. There doesn't seem to be any hot spots where like you know um, there was a significant change one way or the other. Most of the changes well, some of the changes in certain wards are pretty high. I mean, 2,000 voter difference, but some of them are also quite low, or we're talking about like 1 or 2. And so what I would have loved to have time to do is look up the population for each ward, so you can start to say what percentage of like my ward votes in either a presidential election or midterm election. I thought that would have been cool. But anyway, so generally, that was my approach. Some of these wards are like null because we didn't have records from either. There was like no voters in one of these two election cycles, and therefore the difference couldn't be calculated. So though some of these like kind of gray areas represent that kind of fact that like there's literally no data to do the calculation that way. I think just also another thing I did try, which I get that I don't get points for ideas and not execution, but I was really hoping to be able to input my address, have a pin kind of drop into onto this map so I can see where, where my ward is, and kind of start to highlight that. Try to use map layers, but apparently you can't use map layers when you use blended data sources, which is what I did here. So so that didn't work. But anyway, that's my viz. Very simple. I'm happy to bring up any particular counties if people want to see their county. But that was my my take on this data set. So thank you, Tammy, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Brandy. All right, we'll keep moving along.
Right. Yep. Yep. Sorry about that. Thanks, Brandy. That was awesome. I liked your different take on that with wards. So our last presentation is Sarah Carr, who is a research analyst with the state of Wisconsin. And then when Sarah is done, be ready to vote.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thanks for having me. Oh, there's my share screen button. Wonderful. I just put the link in the chat too. Great presentation so far. This is so great to be a part of. I am really passionate about like voter turnout, and have worked as an election official the last couple years and learned a lot from it. So this was a great data set to get into. The wards data, at first I wanted to get into that, but with registered voters, it's by specific ward. But then with the voter data, those combine wards sometimes because polling places can have multiple wards. You might have noticed that if your polling place has multiple wards, like maybe they give you a ballot specific to your school district, or like city council, something like that. So yeah, if I'd had more time, it would have been great to get into the ward data like Brandy did. My vision for this was to do kind of like a infographic that's interactive, and gives some context. I added in the some 2020 census data to get a sense of the population, and then it kind of funnels down from the population to registered voters and then to total voters. And the main metric that I focused on was voter turnout, the number of voters divided by registered voters, and then showing that by county. Um, because like the presidential election and the midterm elections can be so different, I wanted to show that contrast. So that's what I have up here at the top. And then you can dig in more with specific counties and selecting one there. And so you can select a county, select which election you want to look into, and then that context was really important to me with having a reference line of the state average. So that way, uh, users can see where their county, how their county is doing with voter turnout. Are they above the average? Are they below it? And then you can sort by highest to lowest, lowest to highest. So a few different ways to interact with the data. And then I wanted to be sure to include a call to action as we get closer to the 2024 election. So myvote.wi.gov or clicking on the graphic is where you can find your polling place, register to vote, what's on your ballot, things like that. So thanks so much for this opportunity and the great vizzes so far. So thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah.
All right, so now it's time to vote. We have a slide with the QR code, right? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So I'm not displaying the results because I want it to be a secret ballot, just in same voting fashion. So I am going to log into the site though to see the votes come in, and I need to start it, I think.
I'll put the link in the chat as well.
Okay, are you able to vote?
Yes.
Really, thanks to everyone that competed. Those are really all very good. Thank you.
I don't think so. Did you count how many screen there? You said 90. 90. Okay. Alrighty. We'll see you whenever we see you. Yep.
All right, yep, and I see votes coming in, so maybe give it a few seconds, Tosh or Brady, before we move on to the next thing. But I do see votes coming in, so we will find out at the end of the meeting who the winner is. So I will keep the voting results up and live on my screen.
Awesome.
Awesome job, everyone.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thanks to everyone for participating. That was really cool. We got to see a lot of different perspectives on it. All right, everyone, if you haven't voted yet, the link is in the chat. Thanks, Brady, for dropping that. And we will keep moving with our TUG meeting. So our next speaker is from our own Jen Shepard. And so far we've discussed the Wisconsin data. Now we're going to be moving on to national election data.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Tosh.
Mm-hmm.
If you can stop sharing there, I'll take the screen share from you. Thank
Awesome.
you. And all right. Is that showing?
Yes.
All right, fabulous. All right, hey everybody, I'm Jen Shepard. So if you've been attending our meetings for some time now, you probably recognize me. I'm one of the TUG leaders here and also a TUG leader for the Madison Tableau user group. And currently a contractor. I have a couple of different clients in the government or public sector and nonprofit spaces. And I've been using Tableau a really long time at this point. I think we're coming up on 10 years. So I love Tableau, the tool, and I love data viz. And we wanted to add some context to this competition that we just did. So all of the data that you were looking at was related to Wisconsin, which is super great. It's where I live as well. But we thought it might be interesting to see what that looks like at the national level, and also use this as an opportunity to do a little bit of more of a tutorial. So you saw the final product, but you didn't get to see how all of our fantastic competitors actually built their visualizations. So I wanted to walk through some of the vizzes that I built with this national data, and then I'll actually show you how to build my favorite one in Tableau. So the data set I used was different than the Wisconsin specific data. My data set I found online, and I will share that link out with you in a bit in case you want to build some vizzes of your own. But it was a really simple data set. It had all of these rows for each of the states, plus District of Columbia and the United States as a whole. So I really just had these couple of dimensions to work with. I had the state, I had these years going from 2002 up to 2022. I had the voter registration rate, or I'm sorry, voter turnout rate, not registration, turnout rate. And then I kind of had a fourth hidden dimension, which if you've been paying attention to the competition, you probably already know what that is. Anybody want to put that in the chat? Have a guess what kind of just based on what we know about elections, what else do I know about these data? Just give you a second to see if anybody comes up with it. Yeah, yep, presidential or not type of election, exactly right. Perfect, you all are so smart. So yes, even though that wasn't coded in my data, because we know when the presidential elections occur every 4 years, we know that as well. So I pivoted this data in Tableau, so then I had just 3 columns. I had the year, I had the state, and I had my turnout rate. So the first thing I do when trying to figure out how I'm going to visualize this data is really figuring out what is that story that I want to tell. And there's lots of different ways, even with just such a simple data set, that I could take this. I could really focus on those state or regional or geographic differences. I could look at where are we having the best or worst of voter turnout. I could take a look at that presidential versus non-presidential and see if there is a difference between those types of elections. Or maybe I could even pick out a year or 2 and see if there are any insights that are pretty specific to those election years. And there's probably a longer list, but these are things that occurred to me right away that I could do with these data. So I built at least one viz for each of these just to kind of give you a sense of the breadth that you could get even out of a very basic data set and hopefully give you some inspiration. So starting with state regional differences, when you think about geography, probably the first thing that you're thinking of is map. And that is what I thought too. So I initially built a choropleth map. If you're not presenting, can I have you all mute? Sorry, I'm getting a bit of feedback here. Thank you. So I built a choropleth map and I colored it by the voter turnout rate. This happens to be the 2020 data. And I had to do Alaska and Hawaii separately because that's one of the challenges with choropleth maps is that if you're showing the entirety of the US, Tableau wants to make Alaska really big up here and it distorts things. So I made them as separate floating and that works. But for a situation like this, where I want to see generally where things are happening geographically, but I want each state to be equally important because we're not talking about the Electoral College here. We're talking about the rate. And so I wanted to make these more equivalent. So actually what I ended up building, and I think is a better fit for these data, is a hex map. So this makes every state the same size, the same shape, and it makes it a little bit easier to see where those patterns are. So this is 2022. I put a filter on my dashboard, but you can already get a sense of the difference geographically. You might notice this darker patch up here, kind of the north central area, including our own state, where there's a high turnout rate. And you might notice that New England's got a pretty decent turnout rate. And there's some darker states here and there. And then the other thing that might stand out to you is this lighter patch down here in the south central part of the country, where voter turnout rate tends to be lower, at least it was in 2022. So I think if my story is looking at the differences by state, I think a hex map does a pretty decent job of that. I also tried a highlight table. And when I put all the years in at once and colored them by turnout rate, there's a lot going on here. It's kind of pretty if you like the color pink, which I do, but it makes it hard to see where the insights are. You can find them. So some things that stood out to me that may be standing out to you as well is maybe this really dark band for 2020. And we'll come back to that in a little bit when I talk about specific years. And you might notice the alternating bands. Even at the national level, or I should say at the state level, looking across the nation, there's definitely these differences between the presidential years, which are the darker bands, and the non-presidential. So that might stand out to you, that pattern, that kind of cyclical pattern. You might pick out a few details at the state level. So you might notice how Minnesota is kind of darker. But I think with so many data points in this view, it's a little hard to find those. So this wouldn't be my first choice if I were trying to look at state differences. Even when I winnow this down to just looking at the presidential elections or just the non-presidential, it helps. But I still think it's asking a lot of your viewer if you're trying to have them see the state by state differences. I think it's better for this overall patterning. So it's a pretty viz and it definitely has its place, but I don't think it wasn't my top choice of how I would want to show these data or where I thought the real story was here. So the next category I explored was this idea of, are the turnout rates the best and where are they the worst? and actually focus more on the best. And so you might just start with a simple bar chart. Nothing wrong with a bar chart. That is the bread and butter of what I build in Data Viz, and it's probably what you build the most of too, and for good reason. It tells an easy story pretty quickly. So here I just plotted, I took the 2020 rate and I put that, I put that on to show as my measure, and then I put that in by state, and then I sorted it so that the highest turnout rate was at the top, the lowest turnout rate was at the bottom, and I added an average line in there too, just to get a sense of what is that overall, and then you can kind of get a sense of which states are above or below. So this works. I think if I were giving this to somebody who maybe wanted to do a get out the vote type of effort or something, this would be a great opportunity to maybe have a parameter and let them pick maybe just the top and bottom 10 or just the bottom 10. We could definitely play with the interactivity and making this more tailored to my audience. But as a quick view of which states have the best turnout rates and which have the worst, you can definitely get that from this chart. I also had a little fun then turning those values into ranks and doing a rank bump chart. So I just picked 8 sort of arbitrarily, the top 8 states based on their rating, because I was really intrigued by this idea that the same state, okay, there's an exception. Minnesota is our top state. I know we have at least a couple of people here from Minnesota. So great job, y'all, on getting out there and voting and doing your civic duty. That's awesome. But besides Minnesota, the other places do fluctuate a little bit. And so I really liked this idea of seeing that change. And in the interactive version, I added a highlight function so that you could click on a state and then more clearly see its trajectory through these years. And in this case of New Hampshire, it had a nice rise all the way up to second place in terms of its voter turnout rate, and then falling down to number 7, but still staying in that top 8 every year. So I thought that was a pretty cool way to look at the voter turnout rates, especially if you're interested in that kind of jockeying for position or the shifting that happens between the states. I thought that was interesting. Third category, and this is the one that I think a lot of our presenters were intrigued by as well, is this idea that the proportion of our population who votes absolutely varies whether they're electing a president or not electing a president. There is just a lot of difference here. And I found this really interesting too. So this is not my viz. I did pull this from another website. Just thought it was really interesting to see that this has been the trend for a really long time. So these data go all the way back to the late 1700s. And you can see the midterm election, which is non-presidential in orange, presidential in blue. And since at least the mid 1800s back in here, the presidential election has had a noticeably higher turnout rate. Now, I'm not sure if this is calculated in exactly the same way as the data set I'm using, but I think the general pattern probably holds, even if the values are maybe a little bit different. And what was really interesting to me is that wasn't always the case. And I would love to talk to a historian about why in these very early election years, the presidential election was lower. And if any of you have a theory on that, go ahead and put that in the chat. We can share our suggestions of maybe why that's the case. So just a little context for you, historical national as well as just national. But looking at the data we have, one of my favorite visualizations for something like this is a dot strip plot. So there is so much information conveyed in this one chart. So I made my own variable since it wasn't already in the data set of which election years were presidential versus which were not. So then I could group my data by those 2 categories. And then I plotted all 50 states. So each of these rows, these strips, there's a circle for every state. And then I color coded just for a little extra sense of that intensity, that the turnout rate is so much higher in the presidential elections. So you can see if you compare the top half to the bottom half, that general difference, which I really liked, you get that kind of overall sense. You can also hover over these in the interactive version if you just kind of want to see, who's in the middle. You could certainly add a highlighter or a parameter or however you wanted to let people look up a particular state. I did go ahead and label the lowest most values in each section. So you can see District of Columbia had the lowest non-presidential, Hawaii had the lowest presidential, Minnesota, all of these are Minnesota. Minnesota had the highest value for all the presidentials and even for the non-presidential. And I also really like how you can compare the 2 halves to each other. So not only do we get this little bit of a range within a year, but then look how some states have a higher higher turnout rate in a non-presidential election compared to other states in a presidential election. It just shows, even without knowing exactly which state, that there is variability from state to state to state. So I look at this as just kind of a high level overview of the general patterns. And then I would certainly add in additional graphs to help tell the story more completely. But I really like this in general, but it still wasn't my favorite. So I'm not going to show you how to build this one unless we have time, but I did really like it. I also explored this idea of not just the voter turnout rate, but the differential between voting in a presidential year versus a non-presidential year. So I subtracted the two values from each other, and then I plotted that difference in this hex map. So where you see a darker color, like over here in New Jersey, that is a state where the difference is greater. And a lighter colored state like Arkansas and South Dakota and Hawaii, the state is less different. So here, they're in a presidential year versus non-presidential year, they tend to vote at about the same rate. So this kind of works. I mean, you sort of get a sense of that story, but I didn't feel like it was as thrilling of a story, or I didn't feel like it really caught the attention in the way that I wanted it to. So also not my favorite. Next, I built a pea pod chart. I think it's got a few different names, but that's my favorite because I'm a gardener and I think that's so cute. So we have these two little peas. We've got one for each year, for each state, or I should say area. So I've got one for 2020, which is the most recent presidential election data we had, and one for 2022. And then I put them in this pod together so you can see them grouped, and you can also get a sense of how far apart they are from each other. And then I put in these average lines for each year, so you can also see if a particular state was above or below the average. And I quite liked this. You'll see this again. I did end up building this type of chart as one of my favorites, but I was more interested in this story of the differentials overall than in any two particular years. Peapod chart, yes, I like that name too. You know, I keep realizing, sorry, I'm gonna go back just a second. I'm using my mouse on the wrong screen. Sorry about that. So you can see the difference between the two values for the year because of how wide that pod is. And then the average lines you can see for a state like Florida here, that it's a little bit over the average in this particular year. All right, fourth category was I could talk about insights from particular election years. Was there anything culturally or otherwise that was going on that might explain or just lead to a very different pattern in a particular year? So you might remember when I first showed you that highlight table earlier that 2020 was really, really dark. And part of the reason for that is that that was a complete year of data. For some of the earlier years, not every state was included for who knows what reason. Have to look into the source a little bit more for that. But 2020 had complete data, and the rates really were higher in that year compared to other years. So to kind of tell this story, what I ended up doing is taking all of the other presidential years that wasn't the selected year, in this case 2020, and averaging them together. So what we're then telling is the story of typically the state has this voter percentage rate, but in 2020, the rate was, in this case, much higher, or in Utah's case, over 9% higher. So compared to what proportion of the population in Utah generally votes in a presidential election, 9% more voted for the 2020 election. And most of the states had this positive number for this metric. There were a couple that were negative. Oklahoma here is just a little bit lower. I think part of that is more due to spotty data. They didn't have data in every year, so it's harder to know what their typical is. But I thought that was interesting. And my takeaway here would be that people really voted in 2020. You really see this difference if you then change what that reference year is. So in my actual Tableau visualization, I have a parameter where you can switch which year is the year to compare against. And so, for example, if I switch to 2016, completely changes how this looks, because the 2016 average is generally quite lower compared to how they vote in presidential elections. Now, 2020 is part of that average now. So that's also part of why we see such a big difference here. But you can see the chart pattern, color, all of it looks very different. So I thought that might be a good way to tell the story of a year or how one year compares to the other years. So I liked all of these, honestly. I had a lot of fun building them, but none of these were my favorite. I really wanted to tell the story of the presidential versus non-presidential. I thought that was just super, it's not something that I had seen the extent of that before. And I really wanted to tell that story with the data. So for me, I thought the most compelling story I could tell with just these 4 simple columns was the story of how voters show up more when there's a presidential election. And the viz that I used to do that is actually 2 vizzes side by side. So I took a version of that peapod chart, but instead of picking 2 years against each other, I averaged across all the presidential elections and all the non-presidential and showed that difference for a particular state. And then I also made a companion bar chart to go with that to calculate that differential overall, and then sorted the states by that differential. So now we can see at a glance which states have the most difference between their presidential years versus non, which states have the least amount of difference, and then how wide is that difference. And you can also, because of the peapod chart format, not only do you see that differential story, but you can still get some of the insights more generally about the turnout rate in one state relative to another. So for example, you may notice how Hawaii has a pretty narrow band. There isn't much of that difference. And it's hanging out on the left side of the chart relative to some of these other states. Whereas our go-get-em voters in Minnesota are out here on the right, and their highest value is leading the pack. So I thought this told both the story of the differential, but also kind of giving a general insight into election turnout in that state in presidential and non-presidential years. So peapods for the win. We should count up how many times peapod is showing up in this chat. I'm kind of glancing at it. Looks like y'all really latched onto that term. I wish I could credit the person where I first heard that term. I cannot recall. So if that was you, if you're listening, watching this video later, what have you, and that was your term, we love it. Thank you for that. So now what I want to do is actually open up Tableau and show you how to build these charts. And maybe you'll use them on election data. Maybe you'll find another use for them. I think they're really valuable. So in Tableau, this is a workbook where I build all the visualization. So you see here that screenshot I just shared with you. And when you have an interactive version in Tableau, you can also do good things like have the label show up when you click on something. You can, you could add a filter or a highlighter or a search tool so that people could find their state more quickly. One drawback of having all the states in the list is if you really want to know how your state is doing, you have to visually scan for it unless you've given them an easy way to do that. So I could do more things with this if I were really giving this over to somebody who might want to be looking for a particular state. But to show you how to build this, it's pretty simple. So first I want to show you the fields that were already in the data. So the turnout rate was already in there, state was already in there, year was already in there. So those are mostly what I need to do this. So first I'm just going to bring turnout rate out. And in this particular case, there is only one value per year. So I don't really need to worry about duplication, but just as a best practice, I'm going to go ahead and switch that to minimum. It's a little bit more performant than some. And since it's the same value, it won't matter here. And it's a safer bet if there is a possibility that there might be more than one value for a state if something got miscoded or your data is not very clean. And then what I'm going to do is duplicate this pill. So I'm holding down the control key and I'm just clicking on the pill and dragging it. So now I'm going to have 2 copies of my turnout rate. And then I want to present this by state. So I'm going to bring state out here onto rows. So now I'm breaking my data into the state. And then I'm going to pick one of my pills. And instead of a bar chart, I want this to be a circle chart. So here come the P's. And in order to get the 2 P's for the different categories, I had to make a calculation that decided whether a particular year was presidential or not. So that's just a simple calculation where I assigned the years that were a presidential election as presidential, otherwise it wasn't. So that field I'm going to bring out into color, and then that's going to split my 1P into my 2Ps because now I've got the presidential and the non. I already have assigned my color scheme. You would need to do that to your preferred colors. And then for my other pill, that's currently a bar chart, I want this one to be a line chart. You're like, that doesn't look anything like a pod? It sure doesn't. So what we need to do is bring the same field that is splitting into my P's, in this case, presidential races, onto path. And then it's going to change that squiggly line going vertically to basically be the difference between the two lines. Next, I'm going to make this a dual axis. And I want my circles in front of my line. So one thing I can do is either click on, synchronize axes. Always synchronize your axes unless you have a reason not to, which is rare. And then I can click here to move mark types to back so that my circle now is showing in front of my line. And then I'm going to get rid of this header. I don't need to. And we're really close. In fact, if you like the look of this, I've heard this called a dumbbell chart. You could leave it as this. It's the same information. It's almost exactly the same chart. It's just not that pea pod looking shape. And the only thing you need to do to get that pea pod is to take my pill that's the line chart and play with the sizing. So if I drag this up a little further to the right, you see it start to envelop the peas, and I just put it to the point where it's enveloped to my satisfaction. So I like that, where the pod comes just around the outside of the pea, and then the rest is just details. So I think this is a little bit too dark of a pod. I want the peas to really show up, not so much the pod. So I'm going to tone that gray color down a bit. And then really it's just about changing this into percentages. I usually ditch these field labels, so I'll do that. I like things left aligned, so I'd format this to be left aligned. Little things like that. But really, that's it to make that basic P-pod chart. And then the bar chart is also really simple. So I just have my state out here. And in here, instead of wanting to show the turnout rates, I wanted to show that differential. And so I made a calculation that is my differential. And so I said, if the presidential races field is presidential, give me the turnout rate and take the average of that. So now I'm taking all 5, I think it was 5 presidential years, taking that turnout rate and averaging them. Do the same thing for the non-presidential and subtract that from presidential because the voter turnout rate is higher in presidential, and I wanted to show the difference in that direction. So that's my calculation. So then when I bring that out onto columns, I get a bar chart. And then I just need to sort state by that field. Let's do that really quickly here. Instead of data source order, whoops, I clicked alphabetic. I want to do by field, and it already has guessed that I meant average differential since that's in my view. I just want that descending instead of ascending. And then same thing, I would take off the field labels, I would sort this to the left, all that kind of stuff. And then I put them together on the dashboard. And as you can see here, since they are sitting side by side and there's one row for state in both, what I ended up doing is sorting my P-pod chart by my same average differential calculation so that I knew they were in the same order. So then I could drop the header, the state header that would have been redundant. So I only have state on here once. And then that's why I use that interactivity across the views to show the labels. There we go. It's hesitating a minute to show the labels when I click on it. So you can then follow that state across more easily. And like I said before, I would put a filter or some ability for my user to get to the state they're most interested in if I were sharing this. And I probably will do that before I finish publishing it. But yeah, there you have it. Many, many different ways of visualizing even a super basic data set. So again, there were just 3 fields in my data to begin with. And you saw how many vizzes I was able to make from that. And there's probably more. Those are just the few that I chose to build for this. And it really just depends on what theme you want to pull out from the data, what story you want to tell with that data, what your audience is most interested in. Again, if this were a get out the vote or there was some action that needed to be taken as a result of this, finding the states where that turnout rate is lower might be the main goal. And I would want to highlight that. Or if it's, in this case, just being interested in the data and wanting to show something like the general difference or the average difference between presidential and non, we can do that. So hopefully that gave you some ideas, some things to inspire you, whether you're looking at election data or really anything else. So many different ways data can be shown, so many techniques, and I will share these data in case you wanted to make some of your own business from this. But hopefully you got something valuable out of that. I'm happy to answer questions in the Q&A. If you want to put a few in there, I'll be paying attention to that. But otherwise, I'm going to turn it back over to Tosh.
Thanks so much, Jen. That was great. All right. So today we've seen a ton of really cool vizzes. Thanks again to all of our TUG members that put together the Wisconsin election data. And Jen, I think those were all really great inspirational vizzes that you put together with the national level data. So with that being said, this is a great example of one way that you can get connected with your Tableau community is participating. So that's something just to highlight right off the bat, because I think this Q4 TUG meeting is the perfect example of a great way to be involved. So with that being said, I'll just share a few tips and ideas for going into the new year. I know once we start with 2025, a lot of people like to set New Year's resolutions for themselves. So again, getting involved in your data community is a great thing to think about looking ahead. So obviously join a TUG. Congrats to everyone who is here. You're already doing that. I encourage you to keep doing that. So our Wisconsin TUG meets virtually 4 times a year, but we also have the Milwaukee TUG and the Madison TUG for everyone who's in Wisconsin. And then I dropped a few other logos in here. There are TUGs all across the world, and you can join in person if you're in that area, and you can join virtually as well. So I encourage everyone to go and look up any TUGs that they might be interested in. And I'm just going to drop a link. That's where you can go and find TUGs to join. Another way to get involved in the community, there's a ton of forums out there where, just like this TUG meeting today that we've had, you can make vizzes that share important information. You can make vizzes that are used just to practice building out charts in Tableau, or doing your data prepping skills in whatever tool that you like. So these listed on the page are just a few examples. Storytelling with data, data plus TV, the Iron Viz you can enter all the way until the end of October. And that's if you want to compete or try to compete in the Iron Viz at the Tableau conference. We also have Workout Wednesday, Makeover Monday, Viz for Social Good. These are just a few of the many, many options that you can look online and participate in. So I'm going to drop that link as well. So please feel free to check all of those out. And then outside of Tableau, there's always a lot of groups, a lot of networking involved in the data community. I know for myself, especially in the Milwaukee area, there's a lot of groups that come up. I think the same for Madison. So be sure to look outside of Tableau as well if you're looking to get involved. So Data Book Club, that's run by our own Brandy Beals. So if you like to read books, if you like to learn more about data, that's a great group to join. They'll be voting on their next book on October 18th. We also have the Alteryx user group. There's a meeting set for December 12th. So that has to do more with data engineering. There's also the Snowflake user group that I know met, I believe, in July this year. And then Analytics After Dark is a happy hour networking event. The next date for that is April 3rd. So there's so many opportunities to be involved. I think what's so powerful about Tableau is it brings a really strong community together, and there's always inspiration everywhere. So Colleen, thanks for that. I see Snowflake has a Holidata happy hour event on December 5th in Milwaukee. So be sure to check that out as well. And then we do have other upcoming events. So these I already mentioned, the Milwaukee Tug and the Madison Tug have events coming up. And then for our own Wisconsin Tug, we will have another event in January that you can join virtually. Data Book Club we touched on. And then we can move to our prize giveaway.
Okay, yeah, so Tosh, if I could drop the chat drop the results link into the chat, would you mind sharing that out?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so for some reason, the names are not showing on the results tab. So just, but the results are in the same order as the question. So it was Naveen and then Prasan and then Naveen, Prasan, Aaron, Brandy, Sarah. So that's the order of the bars. So if you would like to share the results, drum roll. So Naveen, you win. Congratulations, Naveen.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Congrats, Naveen.
Thank you. This is huge. Thank you.
You're welcome. It was everybody's vizzes were awesome. But yes, Naveen, and I'm looking at my admin of the results. So the results were Naveen, the top bar is Naveen, and then Prasan, and then Sarah, and then Aaron and Brandy. So that's how it actually goes. I don't know why they didn't show the descriptions off to the side, but the important thing, Naveen won. So congratulations, Naveen.
Congratulations, Naveen.
Thank
Great
you.
storytelling.
And it was nice to see everybody's vizzes. It was really cool to see and got to learn a lot from Jen's viz too, especially with those hexagons and how to get spatial data in. Thank you.
Yep. And also thanks, Tammy, for putting this together. I thought this was a great exercise. I love being able to see our Tug members join and show all the hard work that they put in. So great job.
Yes, I thank you. And I echo that too. Thank you to everyone. My apologies for having to multitask just a little bit when the meeting first started, but that all got resolved. So thank you for my fellow leadership members who had my back in getting things started. So thank you.
Yes, of course. And then I also see for our active participant, Robert, thanks for dropping that name. It looks like David Nelson is our winner. So congrats, David. You'll be getting a Tableau swag gift certificate from us for participating. And then before we end today, just wanted to give one more shout out. Thank you to Brandy and to Jen. This was their last Wisconsin Tug meeting as leaders. So they have both put in so much time and effort and energy into building up this Wisconsin Tug group. We really appreciate all of the time that they've spent, and we're sad that they're leaving us as leaders, but please reach out to them. They're great community members to be in contact with. And so, yeah.
And I think I probably speak for Tosh and Brady and hopefully Robert too. You guys have been great mentors to those of us who came on board in the last year or two to be on the leadership team. So you guys have been awesome mentors.
Yep. Thank you. And as Jason said, thank you for that and your party pods.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, it's been wonderful. And yes, I'll still be here be around in the community. I'm still on the Madison Tug leadership team. I'll still be attending and cheering you all on just from the audience side of things. Time to pass the torch and let some new leaders take over. So you all are wonderful, and it's been great.
Thanks for that, Jen. All right, with that being said, thanks to everyone for joining. Like Jen mentioned, we are definitely looking for people who are interested in being a part of the Wisconsin Tug leadership team. So for anyone who has interest, please reach out to anyone on the leadership team already. We'd love to involve more community members. But with that being said, thanks to everyone for participating, and have a great day.
Go vote next month.
Go vote. Yes.
Yes,
thank
go
you.
vote.
Get out the vote.
Get out the vote.
Check when your early absentee voting starts if you want to vote early. Usually it starts on the 22nd, next Tuesday.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
See you next time.